Good morning, everyone. Craig Setzer with you on a Sunday morning. Of course, after a big hurricane event, everybody's exhausted. I hope folks are getting some rest, catching up on their sleep. It is such a stressful thing to go through a big hurricane, even if you aren't directly impacted, and then orders of magnitude on top of that for the people who were impacted. Of course, if you're just new to the stream and stuff, I always ask everybody, please, if you find it useful, helpful, share it with your friends, share it with your family, share it with your neighbors, share it with anybody you know, because I really try to make these different than just your meteorology or your preparation. It's kind of a combination of both things in terms of what we're watching and what we should be doing based on what we're watching. And the other thing, if you're just new to the video here, new to the stream, I try to get right away to who's being threatened, because if you're not being threatened and you don't want to look at meteorology or you don't want to talk about preparations, guess what? I want you to click like, subscribe, get notifications, and then you can just drop off the stream right away. I don't want people hanging around watching like a 10-minute video to find out, oh, it's not coming here. Well, why didn't he tell us that from the beginning? So with that in mind, let's go ahead and just talk right away. And by the way, I hope the audio sounds better. I got a professional streamer's mic, so hopefully that's a start, and we'll go from there with going forward here, and hopefully we'll sound better, look better, be more professional. You know, one of the things that because this is the first time I've ever done YouTube streaming or live streaming of any kind, and now this is I think the third week I've been doing it, so it's been a growing process for me, and I'm sure it's been a growing process for all of you. But I appreciate you sticking around. And for those of you who've been with me since early on, I'm going to repeat a lot of things over and over and over again, because new people are watching, new people are joining all the time. And with that in mind, I want everybody to kind of be on the same page. So those of you who are old pros here, those of you who are who've been with us for a while now, thank you very much. And those who are new, welcome. We try to... Our approach to watching a tropical threat is kind of what I call a funnel approach, and I'll show you that in just a second. But first off, let's get right to it. So where are our threats this morning? Well, thankfully, most of the U.S., except for a heavy rain threat from the remnants post-tropical Ian, thankfully everybody in terms of a tropical threat is zero over much of the Gulf, the United States coast, and the Caribbean. We do have something we're watching because of a tropical wave coming in. So what is a tropical threat over the next 5 days? I define it as it will require you to make some type of preparation other than just getting ready for a windy day or a wet day. This means maybe potentially removing things from your yard that could blow around, potentially putting up shutters, stuff like that. It's zero now for everybody in the United States, so we're not even thinking about that. And our timeline here is 5 days. Now, a lot of folks, and I'll show you the models here in a second, they're like, well, at 12 days, it shows a big storm, blah, blah, blah. You know what? We only care about preparations in like the 5-day time frame. And in terms of watching something, we don't look at models beyond 10 days. We call that in meteorology world fantasy land. We don't go into fantasy land. We stay in the 10 days. But this morning, the folks in Barbados, as well as the southern Leeward Islands, the Windward Islands, as well as Trinidad and Tobago and the northern coast of Venezuela, not quite to the ABC Islands there, have a low risk for a tropical threat thanks to the tropical wave that is in the Atlantic moving to the west. So basically, if you're like, okay, I'm in Northwest Bahamas, I don't see, we're in zero right now for the next 5 days. I'm good. I'm dropping off the stream here or watching the video, and perfect. That's perfect, because I don't want people to stick around if you don't need to stick around, right? If you do want to stick around, of course, I always like to say, let's take a deeper dive. All right, so here's what we're looking at this morning, kind of a close up in the area here. And there's the Atlantic. This is the visible satellite loop through the morning here. And the first thing that drops out is that there's a lot of clouds off the east coast of the U.S. That's associated with the remnants of Ian and a front that has kind of worked its way down there, and the clouds along that front. So no development expected there. There's a little blow up of thunderstorms down here in the northern Caribbean, south of Hispaniola and approaching Jamaica. There's no indication of any circulation or anything developing with that at this time. That's good. This feature, we'll talk about it more in a second. That's an upper level low. It doesn't have any tropical characteristics. It's high up in the atmosphere. It's not what we would say rooted at the surface or in the lower levels of the atmosphere. So we don't expect anything with that. Higher latitudes there, you can see the jet stream kind of making a dip through there. We're getting late in the season to talk about dust. There is a little bit of dust showing up there and a little bit of dust closer to in the eastern Caribbean. Dust is less of a factor as we get later and later in the season because the tropical waves coming off of Africa, they have, number one, they've helped saturate the ground a little bit more, so there's not as much dust is going to get kicked up. And two, it's just late in the season, climatologically speaking, so we don't have as much dust. So down here, this is typically what we call the intertropical convergence zone. Intertropical convergence zone is where we have northeasterly winds meeting southeasterly winds. And there are some parts along that intertropical convergence zone. And let me make my pin size a little bit bigger here so it jumps out. So once again, it's northeast winds meeting southeast winds. And these are the trade winds. And this kind of forms almost like a front along here. But there are parts of the intertropical convergence zone where the winds on one side are from the northeast, but on the other side, they're from the southwest. And we call that the monsoon trough. And the monsoon trough, because the winds are opposing, is what we say has a background of rotation to it. We call it like a environmental vorticity, which means twisting or torque to the atmosphere. So there's that background of rotation that's already present in the monsoon trough, and any thunderstorm activity that develops has the opportunity to concentrate that twisting, concentrate that turning there, and maybe take advantage of. By the way, that thing scrolling on the bottom of the screen there, that's just our ticker that kind of shows the latest advisory coordinates on that. And if the advisories, they're no longer advisories being issued, then guess what? That's our oldest one. I did want to put that up this time because I still want to let everybody know that for those who are tuning in and saying, what happened to Ian? That's the last one on Ian there, so we're not really talking about Ian that much anymore. From a wind event, of course, it is in terms of a rain-making event, combining with that low pressure area up there, a big rainmaker. So let's go on here, and this is the area that kind of jumps out, our area of interest here. I'm not going to say concern. I'm very careful with my choice of words, especially after a major hurricane event, because people before were hearing things I wasn't saying, and more so now people will hear things like, did he say concern? Are we concerned? No, this is our area of interest. We're watching it here, and it's something we'll be watching probably through the coming days. So we're going to do this analysis here, and this analysis is the way we do tropical events. Now, when we're tracking a storm, when there's advisories, things like that, of course, we really follow the Hurricane Center's cone. They're doing all of this in the background, all the analysis, all the forecasting. But to do a good tropical forecast, you have to start with a good tropical analysis. You have to see all the things that are going on, that are going into the models. That's your starting point. So we're going to orient ourselves this morning with all the things that are going on and see how that contributes to what the models are showing and things like that. We've kind of got to have a basket here, and we're putting this in the basket and that in the basket and this in the basket and that in the basket. We are not becoming anchored to any one thing. We're not like, shear is low, that's it. No, we're going to go shear is low or shear is high. Is that a plus or a minus? Is that a positive or a negative towards potential tropical development? And when I say tropical development, I mean development of a tropical depression, tropical storm, something like that, something to get things kicked off. So we see that there's this area here. It's kind of roundish. The appearance on satellite is, when you look at it, it's kind of round. So let's take a different approach here, a different look at it. And this is what we call the infrared satellite imagery. In the infrared, basically it's measuring temperatures or things that the satellite sees and what is the temperature of it. And because higher up in the atmosphere, it's colder, then the clouds that are higher are colder, and we color those usually mostly red. So you can see there's around our little area of interest there. It's once again round in appearance. That appearance structure, that would be a favorable, we'll put that in the favorable camp for potential development. We're not going to say that that's going to make it develop, but that's one of the things we look for to see is there possible development. And then also here, I'm going to go on to the water vapor loop. By the way, just real quickly, if you look upstream here, there's really not much going on there or anything really big coming off of Africa. You can see these thunderstorms here. They look more like they're associated with a convergence area. And if you look carefully here, and you'll see this more in the water vapor loop as well, there's kind of a little bit of wind shear here. So we'll show you all that. And there's our upper level low. That's right over there. All right, so let's move forward here and talk about the water vapor loop. Now, the great thing about the water vapor loop is that it shows so much detail in terms of atmospheric currents, wind patterns, things like that. You can just see so much with the water vapor loop. And so the first thing, of course, that jumps out is post-Ian, we have a lot of dry air that has worked its way in. Now, typically when we see these redder colors here, this area through here, this is associated not only with dry air, but what we call subsidence or sinking air. It's air that's sinking. Typically it warms and dries out the atmosphere. So that resistant to development, usually weather conditions are pretty good, especially because this is middle and upper atmosphere. It doesn't always cover, let's say, showers and maybe a few thunderstorms. Sometimes you don't see that in our water vapor loop here. A couple of other things to note. We've got the moisture coming up here. You can kind of see the overall jet stream pattern. There's an upper level low over there. Here's our upper level low here. There is slightly dry air that is located up here to the north of the intertropical convergence zone and some drier air that's down here to the south. The environment around our feature right here, it's not that dry. It's fairly moist. There is moisture now as opposed to earlier in the season draped across the intertropical convergence zone there. And there's a little bit of moisture located ahead of that feature. There's some dry air out here way ahead of it, but that's probably going to be pushed along with the overall progression of these features down here in the tropics to the west. A little bit of moisture here, that's associated with those showers and thunderstorms as well. One of the things we'll note is not only is it round-ish, our area of interest, but it also looks like it's expanding. And you can see these cloud elements down here are expanding to the south. Of course, because it's moving to the west, these elements here are expanding to the west, and it's not really contracting over here on the east side. So all in all, this area of interest here is getting larger, especially in the middle and upper parts of the atmosphere, and especially the upper parts of the atmosphere. We don't really know what's going on in the low parts of the atmosphere because we're looking down from above, and typically if there's a lot of clouds in the upper parts of the atmosphere, it kind of shields what we see going down in the lower parts of the atmosphere. But that's kind of what we're watching there. Now, also you can see there is a little bit, only a slight bit of shear being imparted by this feature, this upper level low to the north. So it's kind of looks like, at least from this appearance, this analysis, that there's not a lot of shear over it. A shear upstream, we'll talk about that. We'll look at more of a detailed analysis on that in just a second. So in terms of the winds from the satellite, because of course there are no Hurricane Hunter planes out there right now, there is only, most of our data sources are either ships, aircraft that have a thing called ACARS, where the airplane's flying along and it's sending back information at that altitude on wind, temperature, things like that. And we have satellite analysis. And you can see our satellite analysis is pretty detailed. So these are all wind barbs here, and these are satellite-derived winds. And if you know how wind barbs are done, so I get little updates here, and every now and then they will pop up on the screen. Nothing of concern there. It's just an update from the senior meteorologist on duty at the National Center for Environmental Prediction, saying our data going into our morning models looks good. Here's anybody who missed, and that's what's going on. Everything's status quo. So if you know how wind barbs work, it's kind of a flag. It looks like a flag like that, right? And so basically the wind direction kind of is like that. And those little flag elements, they tell us how strong the wind is. The colors represent the layers in the atmosphere. So anything that's blue is in middle portions of the atmosphere, the yellows are middle low, and the greens are kind of low, close to the surface. And you can basically make out kind of a easterly flow here, then a bit of a turning up there into the front, and then here's some northwesterly flow coming into Florida there, and there's the front, of course, right there. And so what happens is because our area of interest has so much cloud cover, mid and high level clouds, we can't really see what's going on at the surface. But we can get enough of a sense from the the southerly winds there and these easterly winds here, and a little bit of a creative imagination to say that there may be some type of low level, not rotation, but twist in the atmosphere. Some winds going one direction, some winds going the other direction, and we kind of get a little bit of a bullseye right there. And this is from the satellite analysis. So that little bullseye jumps out. There's really not much else going on in the Caribbean. There's not much going on in the Gulf of Mexico. There may be a little bit of shear, or not shear, but kind of a turning action out there. It's not that organized. But because we've already looked at our satellite, we know that this is, and our area of interest is here, we know that this is something we're going to be watching. So now that we've got the possibility of some focusing there, that's also, we'll put that in our plus basket in terms of possible development. Is that a sign that could lead to possible development? And so that also goes into the plus category. So far we've got the roundness of it. We've got it's expanding, at least the high clouds are. And we've got kind of our surface or low level indication possibly there. All right, so let's talk about the upper level features now. So these are the upper level winds. This is way up in the atmosphere. And what jumps out, of course, is the jet stream doing that there. There's our upper level low. It shows up very nicely. There's a bit of a northerly wind indicated down here. So we've got kind of a branch of the jet that's breaking off and going to the south there. And our feature here, the thing that jumps out is that the winds are going that way on the top of it. They're going that way on this side of it. They're going that way on that side of it. They're all spreading out. And we call that divergence. In other words, the air is pulling apart here. It's moving out. And the reason it's moving out is because thunderstorm updrafts are pushing up, and then the air is spreading out. And so typically what we look for in this part of our analysis here is, are there winds blowing into the system against that divergence, or are there winds blowing away from it, which is what we would call favorable divergence or favorable upper level profile. And what we can see is that there's no winds blowing into it, so there's no real shear, at least from this analysis here, and we've got a pretty good divergent pattern, meaning that it's probably not impeded or impinged upon in the upper parts of the atmosphere. And in fact, here's the analysis for the divergence there, and you can see the big bullseye. That big bullseye indicates that the air is going up and out, up and out, up and out. So that's going to go into our plus category for possible development as well, up and out. So we've done some analysis now. We're kind of looking at that. Of course, one of our big things we look for is humidity and shear. As I mentioned in the water vapor part of this, the humidity levels are fairly high, or at least look sufficient for development. So that's in our plus category. And now finally our wind shear category here. And I apologize that I have to keep zooming in on these maps, but it is what it is. So one of the things that we're going to look for is our feature, which is right here, in an area of shear or moving into an area of shear. The red is shear, and remember shear is, and I'm just going to kind of draw in the middle of the map here. Shear is this, which is winds blowing near the ground in one direction and higher up blowing in the other direction. But shear is also winds blowing in one direction near the ground and blowing in the same direction but much lighter up. That's shear. And also shear could be winds blowing light in one direction near the surface, near the ground, and blowing much faster up. That's high up. That's also shear. So we measure shear in many different ways. Typically this map takes the shear from about 5,000 feet up and kind of to about 40,000 feet up. So it's a big chunk of the atmosphere where we're looking, do we have shear? Of course, around an upper level low, the winds near the ocean are not blowing very much, but higher up, they are blowing harder, so we have shear there. Typically, when we have a developing system like this, anything that's going on in the system, we don't subtract the winds being created by the system out of it. Once it becomes a tropical depression or a tropical storm, we kind of like circle and cut that out so that the storm itself is influencing our background analysis. But in this case, it's all kind of in there. We're looking at all of it. And you can see here that there's this big green area. So let me outline the area of low shear. Extends all the way over there. So basically, and now we're in South America, of course, there's no development over land. So there's really a large area of low shear into the Caribbean, in the Southwest Atlantic there. There's some shear over here in the Western Caribbean. But remember, what we're looking at here is a snapshot this doesn't really tell us anything about the future, and you have to be careful about not extrapolating too far forward. Well, in 5 days, whatever our area of interest could be here in the Caribbean, and there's low shear. Well, maybe our area of interest doesn't get to the Caribbean one, or maybe two, shear builds in the Caribbean. So that's when we start to really rely on the models. Let's talk about the models, and this is from. So we don't have what's called an invest yet, and an invest is where the National Hurricane Center says we're interested in this. Now, they may start an invest even while I'm speaking. That's a possibility. But what the invest does is it basically opens up a window around the feature that we're watching, and the models can be run off of a point as opposed to just being run for the whole area. So now we're kind of focused on an area. So we'll start, if we get an invest started here, we'll start kind of focusing in on what's going on with that. And additional models will be running. We'll get products like shear products and development products and stuff like that. So this is all, of course, a process. And one of the things we learned this year is that we really want to see development potential in both of our big models, our global models. That's the European model, and that's what this is here, and the GFS model, and I'll show you that in just a second. The European model we use early on when we're just starting to track a feature. We use the ensembles because we want to get just like an overview of kind of what we're looking at. Is whatever's going to develop here or has the potential to develop, is it going to be spread out? Is it going to be close to one track? Is it going to intensify quickly? Is it going to stay weak? We kind of just want to see a lot of possibilities here. We're not focused on one solution, and we won't be focused on one solution for a while. We don't start focusing on the individual models and the single solutions and start giving them credence until we have a developed center, until we have something that is very trackable in the satellite, that's trackable by the hurricane hunters, and that is trackable by the computer models. So right now it's just broad, but as I will show you in just a second here, our watching of this and our planning of this, once again, it's like a funnel. Right now we're just watching it. So are we getting excited? No, not at all. And had Ian not happened, or because Ian has happened, we would approach this the same way. It's not like now we're suddenly on edge. Well, we are on edge, but we're not changing our preparation or our timeline or anything like that because of what has happened. We deal with every single storm on its own. If this becomes a storm, we'll deal with it on its own. Of course, in the background of what's happened with Ian, we're very, very sensitive because it's almost like we're already injured and we don't want anything else to happen. We need to recover, but we're going to deal with this apart from what happened already. So let's talk a little bit about the European ensemble here. And a couple of things that jump out is that there's a little bit of a signal, and I call it a signal because it's not necessarily something that develops there early on. This is through 10 days here, and you can see the timeline up here in the upper right through 10 days. And so there's a little bit of a signal, and that signal drops off here as it enters the islands there in the Eastern Caribbean. And then the signal comes back later in the period. Now, we know that climatologically, in other words, historically, the Eastern Caribbean is not a very, very favorable area for development. We see lots of waves, disturbances go through there, and it's usually not until they get to the central or western part of the Caribbean that they have some potential for development. And that's what this model is saying here too. So here in the Central Caribbean and Central America, in the Western Caribbean, obviously we'll be watching it, and we'll be watching it all across the Caribbean and the Gulf and Florida as well. But once again, our time frame here is 10 days. So right there is 10 days. And here's kind of our ensemble spread. So in 10 days, there's the possibility, let me put a 10 there, there's a possibility we could have something develop there. It's a possibility. We don't know. What would happen after that? We don't know. But that means we're going to keep an eye on it. And we talked about kind of a lot of our favorable things. Of course, the water's warm. I'm not even going to show you the water this morning. So here is the GFS, and I don't want to discount this feature out here. This is another wave. This will probably develop. The development potential is high, but you can see we're not going to worry about it. It's going to head out into the ocean there, and as it gains what we call poleward progress, headed towards the north, you can see it's going to be heading up into an environment that it could be favorable for development. It might not be, but we're not going to worry about that. We're going to kind of make our focus here on this feature, our area of interest. So that's our starting point in the GFS. The GFS, like it was with the system before it, a little bit more aggressive on development potential there. There it is into the Eastern Caribbean. And if you remember with Ian, the GFS was very, very aggressive in development down here. It had a tropical storm entering the islands on some of the computer runs. But remember, it really didn't develop until it was over in this area here, south of Jamaica. So it may be, we know now it kind of has a more aggressive tendency here. Is it a bias? Could be that it's more aggressive down here in the Eastern Caribbean. But it's something that we'll also kind of put in our basket here, that it shows some potential development here. And let's see, by the time we get to about 10 days here, there we are, it's 8, 9, and there is 10. Now, what you can see there at 10 days is that the ensemble, and remember the ensemble is one computer model that's run many, many different times with little kind of like changes to the atmosphere to see how does it develop if initial state is stronger? How does it develop if the initial state's weaker? How does it develop if there's more shear? How does it develop if there's less shear? All of these conditions are kind of thrown in, and the models run again and again and again and again. And so that's what gives us our possibilities here. And you can see it's got a bigger spread here at 10 days. It also has a larger area here, same thing, bigger spread, because it has more development at the beginning of the model run there. And so this is at the 10 days there. This is a week from Wednesday of this week. That's where 10 days is. So will we be watching it? Absolutely. Do we have plenty of time? Absolutely, to watch it here. Are we getting excited about it? No, but we're watching it, and so we'll continue to watch it. Are we going to make too much of this spread here? No, but it kind of gives us an idea, you know, that there's the possibility in our back of our mind. It's a feature that goes more to the north if it develops. It may go more to the west if it develops. It may go more to the south if it develops. All of those are possibilities. All of those are things we're going to be watching. So what does all of this mean? So I call this our kind of our prep and timeline cone. And in terms of where we stand on that, right now we are more than 7 days away. And I'm talking about Florida. I'm talking about the Gulf Coast. I'm talking about the Eastern U.S. We are more than 7 days away. So what are we doing? We're keeping an eye on it. We're not making preparations. We're not doing anything else like that. Now, when I say we're not making preparations, that's against the background that we already have a hurricane kit and we have a hurricane plan. And remember, the two things are very different. Our hurricane plan, the first thing on our hurricane plan is, do you live in an evacuation zone? That's the first thing of your hurricane plan. Because if you do live in an evacuation zone or a mobile home, or you have special needs, then your plan is different from everybody else's plan. Your plan means you will be moving out of the evacuation zone, the storm surge zone, or if you have special needs, or you live in a mobile home, you have to move into a reinforced building or a place where you can ride out the storm that's more safe and it's away from the water. Remember, flee the water, hide from the wind. And in South Florida, we're pretty built up to handle hurricanes, which is a good thing here for us. We can get out of the evacuation zone, but we don't have to go far. You just have to get out of the evacuation zone. So that's part of our hurricane plan. And then from that, there's all these other details which we can go through in the upcoming week. In terms of the hurricane kit, remember our hurricane kit has two parts to it also. One part of our hurricane kit is preparing our home or where we live for a possible hurricane. And that might mean shutters, it means flashlights, it means things like that for during the storm. That's the one part. The other part of the hurricane kit is for after the storm. And that's the part where you can't get out. You're kind of stuck in your home after a storm because maybe trees are down, your power's out. So that part of the hurricane kit includes how you're going to communicate, like an AM/FM radio. That's where you get information maybe because you don't have power, you can't watch TV. How you're going to get cellular service or internet service. Usually it's a cell phone and cell phone ways to charge your cell phone. There's many, many parts of our post-storm hurricane kit, which does include 5 gallons of drinking water per person. Now, the big thing in Southwest Florida is the people who are in homes that were badly damaged, but they're still in their home. They don't have power. They most likely don't have water. So they are dealing with a very, very bad camping experience, unfortunately, where they're kind of just, they're stuck and they're basically waiting for not search and rescue, for recovery efforts to come in and help them. The thing is that usually the recovery efforts go to the most hard-hit areas first, and then they kind of spread out or fan out into areas that are less say urgent, put it that way. If we're hit by a storm and we're in a less urgent area, we want to be able to hold out for 5 days until recovery efforts can get to us. So that's kind of the thinking there. And we'll go through this in the coming days. I'm not overly worried. I'm exactly where I was, where we were 7 days before Ian, unfortunately, which did become a huge, huge hurricane event here in Southwest Florida and West Florida as well. In fact, pretty much the entire peninsula was impacted in one way or the other. So let me just wrap it up with that. Glad to have you with me. If you like the videos, if you find them helpful, please be sure to like, subscribe, get the notifications. I know sometimes people are like, we just like knowing where things stand, Craig. So thanks for telling us that, and I'm happy to help. This was one of the things that I learned a lot about being in Florida for 25 years and doing the weather on TV for 37. So I kind of know what I'm talking about, and hopefully it'll help everybody that's listening. So I'll have another update tomorrow about 10:45. That's going to be our time here, 10:45 tomorrow. You know what? I'm wondering if it should be in the afternoon. You know what? I'll leave that up to you guys in the comments if you think it should be in the afternoon, like 4:45 or 10:45 in the morning. 4:45 in the afternoon once we get back into the weekly schedule. Let's do that. So tomorrow, 4:45 will be the next update, 4:45 on Monday. See you then.